1. Colonial economies and economic inequality in the world. The late 19th to early 20th centuries marked a critical phase in global economic history characterized by the expansion of European imperialism, the integration of colonial economies into the global economic system, and the intensification of economic inequality, both within and between nations. Colonial economies, the imperial powers, primarily European nations like Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, and others, exploited their colonies for raw materials, agricultural products, and cheap labor, reshaping the economies of these regions in the process. The colonial system was primarily extractive in nature, with economic activities designed to benefit the imperial powers rather than the colonies themselves. For example, resource extraction. Colonies in Africa, Asia, and Latin America provided raw materials like rubber, cotton, minerals, and agricultural products, which were crucial for the industrial economies of Europe. Plantation economies. In colonies such as those in the Caribbean and Southeast Asia, plantation economies focused on crops like sugar, tea, and tobacco, which were produced through exploitative labor systems, including slavery and indentured servitude. Cash crops. The introduction of monoculture farming in colonies like India and parts of Africa disrupted traditional farming practices and led to widespread poverty for local populations, as they were forced to grow crops solely for export rather than for local consumption. Economic inequality. Colonialism exacerbated economic inequality in the world in several ways. Unequal trade relations. The colonial system structured global trade in a way that heavily favored the European powers. Colonies were often locked into the export of raw materials and the import of expensive manufactured goods from Europe, creating a dependency that stunted the economic development of the colonies. Labor exploitation. In many colonies, local labor was exploited through harsh working conditions and low wages, while the wealth generated by their labor flowed back to the imperial metropoles. This created an imbalance in both the global and local economies, where imperial powers amassed wealth and colonies were left impoverished. Political and economic control. The economic policies implemented by colonial powers often concentrated wealth and resources in the hands of European settlers and businesses. Indigenous populations had limited access to economic opportunities, and local industries were often destroyed or subordinated to the needs of the colonial power. 2. Resource competition among European powers and protectionism. The scramble for colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific was driven by the desire of European powers to secure vital resources that were necessary for their industrial economies. This competition not only intensified imperial rivalry, but also led to the rise of protectionist economic policies in Europe. Resource competition. As industrialization surged in Europe, the demand for raw materials skyrocketed. European powers, seeking to secure long-term access to these resources, competed fiercely for colonies and spheres of influence. The major resources sought included rubber, essential for the burgeoning automobile and manufacturing industries. Rubber became a highly prized commodity, particularly in the Congo and Southeast Asia. Minerals, gold, diamonds, and other valuable minerals were critical for expanding industrial economies and regions, like South Africa and Rhodesia. Now Zimbabwe became key sites for mining activities. Agricultural products. Colonial powers also sought control over regions that could supply cash crops, such as tea, sugar, and tobacco, which were in high demand in European markets. This competition for resources led to the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885, where European powers formalized their claims to African territories, disregarding local populations and their existing social structures. Protectionism. With the rise of economic nationalism in the late 19th century, many European nations implemented protectionist measures to safeguard their industries and secure access to colonial resources. Protectionism during this period involved several strategies. Tariffs. European countries, in an effort to shield their industries from foreign competition, imposed tariffs on imported goods. This was particularly true in the case of agricultural and manufactured goods, where domestic industries were growing and becoming more competitive. State subsidies. European governments often subsidized domestic industries, such as steel and coal, to ensure that they could compete globally. These subsidies helped European manufacturers maintain control over critical industries, while keeping prices low. Colonial preferences. Protectionist policies extended to the colonial system itself, with imperial powers granting trade preferences to their colonies. Colonies were often required to trade exclusively with the mother country, which helped to reinforce the global economic hierarchy in favor of the imperial powers. 3. Economic growth in the U.S. and Germany and changes in global economic order. The late 19th and early 20th centuries also saw the emergence of new economic powers, most notably the United States and Germany. Their rapid industrialization and economic growth marked a shift in the global economic order, challenging the dominance of traditional European powers like Britain. The United States. The United States experienced rapid industrial growth during this period, particularly after the Civil War 1861-1865. This was fueled by several factors. Abundant natural resources. The U.S. had vast reserves of coal, oil, and other natural resources that were essential for industrialization. Technological innovations. The U.S. saw significant advancements in technologies such as the telegraph, railroads, and steel production, which facilitated economic growth. Immigration waves of European immigrants provided cheap labor for U.S. industries, particularly in urban areas and manufacturing centers. Expansion of the railroads. The construction of the Transcontinental Railroad opened up new markets and enabled the efficient transportation of goods across the country, linking raw materials sources with industrial centers. The U.S. became a major player in global finance, securing its position as a creditor nation. By the early 20th century, the U.S. had surpassed Britain in terms of industrial output, cementing its status as a rising economic power. Germany's economic growth was similarly remarkable. After its unification in 1871, Germany rapidly industrialized, becoming the world's leading producer of chemicals and steel by the turn of the 20th century. State-driven industrialization. The German government played an active role in promoting industrial growth, often intervening in the economy to support key sectors such as chemicals, steel, and engineering. Education and research. Germany invested heavily in education, particularly in technical fields, which fueled innovations in science and engineering, giving German industries a competitive edge. Banking system. The German banking system, characterized by close ties between banks and industry, facilitated the long-term investment necessary for industrial expansion. As Germany industrialized, it sought to challenge Britain's dominance in the global economy. This was exemplified in the competition for colonies and the development of a modern military-industrial complex that would later play a role in the lead-up to World War I. Shifts in global economic order. The rise of the U.S. and Germany, alongside the continued dominance of Britain and France, led to a more multipolar global economic system. The balance of power shifted as these new, industrialized nations increasingly influenced global markets, trade routes, and finance. The established imperial powers, particularly Britain, found their economic hegemony increasingly challenged, especially as the U.S. and Germany began to assert themselves in international trade and finance. 4. World War I and the war economy. World War ONR, 1914-1918, had profound effects on the global economy. The war economy significantly altered the economic relationships between nations, as well as the structure of international trade and finance. Economic mobilization. The total war strategy of World War I led to the full mobilization of national economies. Governments took control of industries, resources, and labor to support the war effort, leading to significant shifts in economic power. Government intervention. Governments in belligerent nations took unprecedented control of their economies, rationing goods, centralizing production, and managing labor forces to ensure the supply of materials needed for the war effort. War financing. The war was primarily financed through government borrowing, leading to massive debts for many countries. National governments issued war bonds and took loans from other countries, particularly from the United States, which emerged as a major creditor nation. Industrial shift. Many civilian industries were converted to wartime production. For example, automobile factories were repurposed to produce military vehicles, while agricultural production shifted toward providing food for the military. In war-related industries, economic impact on Europe. Devastation of European economies. Europe's economies were severely impacted by the war, with widespread destruction of infrastructure, cities, and industries. This, coupled with the heavy financial burden of war debts, crippled many European nations. Inflation. The war economies led to high inflation in many countries, particularly in Germany, which would later contribute to significant economic instability and social unrest.